lay 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 la 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 lay mone awalay kudera ay lay lay
lay lay lay lay la 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 dano awalay kudera ay.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Hannah and I'm here today with my friend Barry, who's going to be talking to us about his experiences and memories of his time in British Somaliland. I first met Barry on social media where he used to search for photos of Borama, where I'm from, and I've posted a few pictures there, and he saw those photos and replied to me saying it's changed a lot since I was there in the 1950s. And I remember being surprised, thinking, wow, I can't believe that I'm talking to someone that has been to Borama from many years ago. So we exchanged emails and we got to know each other by email, and today, thankfully, we'll be talking more about his experiences and what he remembers of his time there. So thank you both for...
Oh, that's fine. I think I really ought to start to say that things in Borama I'm sure have changed, but since the middle to late 50s, even getting to Borama or getting to Somaliland has changed. My father arrived in Somaliland by ship to Aden, which is in Yemen, and then flew from there to Berbera and then on to Hargeisa. When my mother and I travelled some 2 or 3 months later, we flew from London Heathrow on a 4-engined aircraft. It took quite some time. We took off from London at lunchtime. We landed in Rome and got off the aircraft and had afternoon tea. Once the plane had been refilled, we then landed in Khartoum. We then had to get off the plane again, where we were entertained with more snacks and drinks, and eventually we landed in Aden, possibly some sort of 15 hours later. It was from there that we got a small aircraft to Hargeisa, which landed in a very, very, very hot Berbera. And then we arrived in Hargeisa. My father, who had been there for a couple of months, had made 1 or 2 new friends. We stayed with them for possibly a week and had a look around Hargeisa, which again was somewhat different from being in the UK. It was a little bit like going back, I suppose, when you're 12 years old, of thinking it was more like the lands of the Bible than anywhere else. But it was very intriguing. We met some very nice people. Our first place of stay really was, my father's first contract was to complete a school in Gabili, outside of Hargeisa, on the road to Borama.
And what year was you first? What year was it?
That was either late 1957 or early 58. I can't find my parents' old passports to work out exactly when we got there. It was either late 57 or early 1958.
Right. So your father was he working with the government, or was he? My
father was working for the British government. It was a company which was known as the Public Works Department. There was 4 government departments really. There was the administrative department, which was in Hargeisa, which was called the Secretariat. There was the building and construction side, which was the Public Works Department. There was the water department, the agricultural department, and other than that, there was just a smashing of British Army people there that I suppose were looking after, controlling, and were the European branch of the Somaliland Scouts.
Right.
And there was a sub-branch of them which was the police force, where there was a very small ratio of European police training and looking after the Somali police. So our first stay in Somaliland as a family was living in a small bungalow in a village called Gabili. The bungalows were built for the school teachers. They were completed, so we lived in one of those. We were told by one or two Somali people that we knew that when we arrived in Gabili, we should really stop at the village as it was then and introduce ourselves to the head man, who was a very old gentleman. Of course we could not speak the language, but our Somali driver interpreted to us, and he was most overcome. Although what was Gabili, possibly an hour's journey from Hargeisa.
Yeah.
He claimed I was the first white child, and my mother was the first white woman to actually arrive in Gabili in his living memory. And it was then we realised that those who were in Hargeisa and wouldn't go anywhere else, and us people who wanted to venture out into Greater Somaliland were just the people who are willing to do it. We stayed in Gabili for a few weeks, but there was other works planned for my father, and the bungalow was very, very small, so we then travelled to Borama. And we lived in Borama for, I think, 2 periods, one of 6 months because we had to come home through family problems, and then we went back at a later date. My father's main task was finishing the school in Gabili, looking after the construction of some health centres. And one of them I can remember was in Wajala. In Wajala, right on the border of Ethiopia. My mother and I nearly got arrested in Ethiopia because we decided to walk across the bridge that went over the Tug. Hence many people called it Tug Wajala for some unknown reason. There was a ringing of bells, and my father was standing on the Somali side going crazy, telling us to get back because we were going to be arrested for crossing the border. So we had the job in Tug Wajala, the job in Gabili, various small works in Borama, and we had a contract in Abdul Qadir.
Right, Abdul Qadir in Ogun, yeah.
The Abdul Qadir was sort of en route to the Zayla and Djibouti.
Yeah.
We had our holidays, we had our local holidays in Zayla. Although I was very, very young, to me it was a very, very interesting place, and at certain periods of its history was, I take it, a trading post and a big town.
Yeah, Zayla is one of the most ancient Somali towns. It's been inhabited for centuries, and at various points has had various important parts to play. It was once the capital of an emirate, or no, a sultanate.
Yeah.
That was at war with the what is now known as Ethiopia. There was a great war in the Middle Ages, after which it declined. But yeah, it was once, very prosperous.
The thing that amazed me, we holidayed there, and we went into Djibouti, which was amazing. It was like a small, very small European town in the middle of nowhere. And I can remember we bought some fishing tackle there, so we could go fishing at Zayla. And you look back on all the old pictures of Zayla, and you look back at some of the engravings.
Yeah.
To think that we actually fished off that jetty that went out into the sea that had been there for hundreds and hundreds of years. it wasn't until the internet came along and you could find these old photographs and these old engravings that you realised that was probably one of the only things that's remained exactly as it was, where a lot of the buildings are sadly in decline, which is in my book is terrible.
Absolutely.
You know, the only thing that seemed to have survived the ravages of war is the jetty that the ships used to tie up to when they came in.
Yeah.
But no, life in Borama was good. We weren't a European family that was surrounded by servants. We had a guy who was a cook. He had lived in Kenya as a young man. I don't know who taught him his cooking skills, but he was absolutely brilliant. He came to Borama with us. We used to go shopping in the mornings in the Magala, and we used to visit all the shops and the butchers, and it was just a great place. I mean, being Suffolk people here in the UK and being country people, we enjoyed the greenery. We used to walk through the green areas. I believe they're no longer there, but we used to watch the women come past our bungalow in the mornings with their washing bowls on their heads to go down to the lakes that were at the bottom, and is it called the seeraha? The seeraha. There used to be 2 big lakes there, and all the ladies used to go down there in the morning with their washing on their heads, and wash their clothes and hang them on the big thorn bushes to dry.
Yeah, my mum tells me when she was younger they used to do the same.
Yeah,
but now there's no, it's pretty much dried up.
it's dried up.
Yeah, they don't wash clothes there anymore.
No.
But yeah, when my mum was younger as well,
Yeah.
she tells me that they used to like dip their legs into the
Yeah,
lake.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it was beautiful.
And there used to be big turtles that used to be in the lake as
Yeah,
well. Yeah, because I believe your mother went to the first little school, didn't she, in Borama?
Yeah, the Howard Tucker School, which is, I believe, near where you live.
Yeah, not just around the corner.
Right,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. Yes, that school. In fact, I think 1958 was probably, if I remember rightly, there was the grand opening of the school. I can't remember who came to the school to do the grand opening,
Okay.
but the teacher was a single English lady called Miss Holt, and there was the Europeans who lived in Borama at the time. There was Mr. Tribe, who lived almost down on the Seeraha, and his wife and little boy. And there was my mother, my father, and myself. At the top of the hill was the police, chief of police and his wife, and then there was the district commissioner and Miss Holt. So we were really the only Europeans who actually lived in Borama. But no, it was great memories. We had great times there. The wildlife was fantastic. It was just a wonderful time. We used to walk up the hill opposite the bungalow where we lived. Used to watch the birds, the ones that used to have their nests that used to hang in the trees. Fantastic butterflies there were in Borama. Tremendous amount of different species of birds. I really liked it.
But you know the Seeraha range,
Yes.
how would you describe it? Because when I see it now, I see it, it's just a plain, grass field. There's not many trees, they've been cut down.
Yeah, well, Mr. Tribe, who was in charge of agriculture, he used to rule the local people with a rod of iron. If he ever saw anybody grazing their sheep or their camels, he'd be down there in his Land Rover telling them that they'd got to move away. There were a lot of they weren't very big, but from, I should say, if you look at the road going out of Borama,
Right.
away from Hargeisa,
Yeah.
across where your mother used to do her washing, was a very wooded tree area.
Okay.
Probably, it's very difficult to describe it. I'm just trying to think back. There was probably 20 or probably 15 or 20 acres of trees there. and there was footpaths through the trees, so that they were quite close together. And then the other side of the road, you came down the hill and there was quite a wide grass area, and then away from Borama there was trees probably along there. They weren't dense, but there was trees along there for probably half, 3/4 of a mile of trees, because the central grass area there, at certain times of the year, a company called the Desert Locust Control used to move on to that green area. They used to put up their tents and bring their aircraft in, and I think the main reason was because they tried in those days to control the swarms of locusts, because it was quite an agricultural area, and the problem was, being quite close to the Ethiopian border, Ethiopia never bothered to do any control at all, and there used to be European guys that used to go out and patrol that border, and radio in about the oncoming locust swarms that were coming from Ethiopia. And these young Kenyan pilots used to fly these small planes with big tanks in the back and spray the locusts to kill them off before they came into the country. They were young, crazy, white South African and Kenyan boys. The way they used to fly those planes. But that was something that probably doesn't happen today, and hasn't happened for lots of years. I don't know whether you still suffer from a lot of locusts.
I've seen there are sometimes they do come. There's a specific season where they come.
Yes,
but it's not. I don't think it's as damaging.
No, I mean I can remember Ali, our cook, shouting me one afternoon. He says, Barry, come this way, and he was pointing over the hills away from towards the Djibouti way, and you could see these black clouds, and you knew it wasn't thunderstorms. It was the wrong time of the year. The rains had just sort of finished. And I said, what's that? Oh, he says, that's bad news. And he hadn't got the right word. He didn't know the word. But within an hour and a half, all our area was just surrounded by young pink locusts. They weren't, it was, but I mean, the rainy season, I don't know whether it's still the same, because the weather conditions throughout the world have changed. But you could set your clock every afternoon of what time the rains were going to stop and what time the rains were going to finish in Borama. It was brilliant. We always used to go for a walk after the rains in the afternoon. But no, great times, great memories, great place. There was water shortages at certain times. My father used to be in control of the water, because the water used to come out of some deep natural springs at Amud,
Right.
and were pumped into the centre of Borama, because in those days, although the few European houses had water, at certain times of the year we used to have our water rationed, and it was all done by us Europeans getting together, realised what the water shortage were like, and decided that we were going to implement the rations on ourselves. We couldn't be seen to have water when the local people didn't have water. But from time to time, the water level used to drop to a certain level where the pumps could not pick the water up, so the pumps had to be turned off, otherwise it would have destroyed the pumps, because they were water-cooled pumps. Yes, my father had one or two run-ins with the district commissioner, who insisted when the water was short that his gardener was still going to water his lawn. My father spoke to him in the politest way and said, I'm sorry, but you shouldn't be watering your lawn when there are local people walking for miles to get water in Borama. And he wouldn't take any notice, so my father turned his water supply off at his house. But you know, ladies used to walk into Borama with a big 5-gallon kerosene drum on their back. They'd probably walk for 2 or 3 hours to get to Borama. They used to queue at the central water tap in the middle of town, and when water was short, why should some guy up the road be watering his lawn when the water was in such short supply? He did do as he was told eventually, but like all district commissioners, he wasn't very impressed with being put on the water shortage with everybody else. But that was just the way of my dad. That was just his way. But no, I still remember the shiny silver, I think they were 5-gallon kerosene cans. I don't know whether kerosene is still sold like that in Somaliland, or will you use kerosene much now? But everybody used to, all the local people used to come to pick their water up in 5-gallon kerosene cans. The local people used to make charcoal fires out of kerosene cans. Kerosene cans were used for everything. So if kerosene is not sold in cans in Somaliland now, it's probably sold in plastic. But I don't know. I don't know if it's still the same. But there we go. They're basically my my memories of Borama. I look on the internet now and see that the place has probably grown 1,000 times bigger than it was when I lived there. On the outskirts it still looks as pretty as it was. I'm sure the people are still as great as they were.
So what are your best memories? You know, you were a child in Borama. I know that your memories are more vivid and you can remember many things. So what were the kind of the best things that you remember? And
I think the best things I can remember is how travelling from the UK and living in Borama really was. It was very much in some ways like where I'd come from. We never lived in a big town. We always sort of lived fairly well in the countryside. We although we come from the flatlands, it was very nice, and my memories of the hills and the big euphorbia cactus that used to grow. Yeah. The difference in the animals. I remember things, I think you used to call them Sakaro, Dig, and Geranuk, and I forget what the other one, Owl, yeah.
Yeah, the camel.
The people, although I suppose I don't know how many Europeans had lived in Borama, but everybody was very nice, the people were good. I was very young. I had lots of very blonde curly hair, and all the women were intrigued about this young white guy. But everybody was just so the memories that people were just so friendly. The countryside was nice. The weather was wonderful. The rains were predictable, which they're not in the UK. It was very different. I mean, we had no electricity. There was no electricity in Borama in 1958. Our cooker that our cook used to cook on was kerosene. Our fridge was kerosene, and our lights that we had at night were all kerosene. And you know, you look at the internet now and you see the pictures of Borama in the evening, and the place is lit from one end to the other. But my memories were just, although it was very basic, it was very pretty, it was very beautiful. The people were wonderful. No one specific memory really, just that it was such a nice place to live. In some ways I think I'd be frightened to go back, because it would be a completely different world to it is today. But I suppose I'm older and wise enough to understand that progress is progress. It just intrigues me how there are so many people to make Borama as big as it is. Where have they all come from? Where have they all come from?
Yeah, it's become a very of course, it's home to the University of Amud, as
Yes.
you know, which I'm sure you can tell us about.
Yeah, Amud was basically a boys' school.
Yeah, before that.
But
yeah.
when I went there, but I was also very intrigued about outside the university, amongst all the cactus and things, were like some very old foundations, as though there was sometime in the very, very past, there was some kind of fairly big, possibly a bigger place than Borama was when I was there.
Absolutely, yeah. There's many historical places. There's a place called Old Amud, and that is home to some ancient buildings. I've read articles about some English explorers that went there, and they found ceramic pots and many artifacts that point to, you know, an ancient history. And it was a trading town, and it linked, you know, the capital. It linked Harar in Ethiopia.
Yeah, Harar.
Selah.
Yeah.
So people used to live there.
It was sort of a triangle then.
Yeah.
Because I can remember reading somewhere, and I can't remember how long ago I read it. It was in the last few years, probably off the internet, where that there was gemstones that were found there, and also Egyptian traders used to come there to meet the Somali people to buy ostrich feathers, which were highly prized hundreds of years back, possibly. Yeah.
I mean, when obviously I grew up here, so I didn't grow up in Somalia, so I don't know about, you know, the history. But when you read about, there's actually quite a lot of, you know, interesting facts about, you know, the history of that area. That interacted with the world, you know, Selah as a port, it interacted with India and Asia and all these places. And there's not a lot that's written about it, but there are some sources out there. So I think it's worth, you know, writing about.
There was probably more interactivity with Egypt, Persia, the Middle East, India 200 or 300 years ago than there was probably in the 20th century.
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's all very...
Yeah, it was very interesting.
As a child, obviously you were a child yourself, how did you interact with other children? What were the games that they used to play? What were the things that...
No, I think we've discussed this before. There was a game that used to be played with stones.
Right.
Now, I used to watch, not the children, but I used to watch the men play this game.
Right.
My Somali was almost zero in those days. They couldn't speak English. I couldn't understand the rules. I couldn't understand how the game was played. There was always great celebration when somebody won the game, but I could never understand how they'd won it.
I think you're talking about, is it the one where you have the holes in the ground? Like you dig holes and then they chuck the stones in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know how they do it. I just know it's called Ria Kadalis or something.
You'll have to find out when you go back to Borama
and the rules,
and find out if there's anybody who still plays it.
Yeah.
They probably play internet games now.
And they used to. Did you say something about a beetle that they used to?
Yeah, the boys used to come. They used to come down past our house because there was a particular tree that was growing, not in our garden, but down towards the seeraha.
Right.
And they used to catch these beetles, and they used to put a piece of cotton on their leg, about 3 feet or a metre long, and they used to fly these beetles just like you would fly an aeroplane. Yeah, it was probably the very, very early Somali version of a drone, I think.
Yeah.
But no, we used to. There's a few bits and pieces. I mean, I picked one or two things up. I mean, I suppose I can't remember whether they were bought at the door or whether I bought them in town.
Yeah.
But these are my two great memories of Borama. This is a knife that scared my mother to death, but I was insistent on keeping it, and I brought it home. This is the other one. It's not quite as elegant as this one. They came from Borama. There was a tree that used to grow somewhere on the side of the road between the hospital and the old district commissioner's house. My mother told me that the English name for it was called Flame of the Forest. It was a large tree which used to have beautiful big red flowers on. And when the flowers had died off, it used to have big seed pods like beans. And I don't know why, I picked one of these seed pods off. And how long ago would that have been now? That must have been 60 years ago. And it's travelled with me, the beans are still inside it, and I've still got it. Don't ask me why, it's just one of the natural things that I picked up from Borama. It's probably the only thing that ever grew in Borama. These probably were made somewhere, I don't know whether they were made in Borama, but they were bought in Borama. So these are just the 3 items. I've got a few bits and pieces that I picked up when I lived in Berbera, but these are my three main memories or souvenirs or whatever you would like to. I don't know if they're still made like that today.
No, I think these are usually just, you know, historical items.
Historical items. It makes me feel even older now. Historical items. Yeah. Okay.
I've actually seen a knife like that that's stored in the British Museum.
In the British Museum, is it? Oh, I see.
Obviously, it's much older than your one.
Yeah. This one is circa 57 or circa 58. So another 40 years and it'll be an antique. I'm thinking really whether. If Jama wants to take my Berbera things back, whether they ought to go back to Berbera to the museum.
Right.
Or are you going to have a museum in Borama?
Oh, that is the plan.
That is a plan. Well, perhaps we'll hold on to these, and they can go back. They can go back to where they came from.
Yeah.
So Jama can't have the knives. He can have the drill bit, but he can't have the knives.
Yeah. Also. Obviously, your father was working, you know.
Yes.
He was helping people. Did he ever meet, you know, any famous figures or officials in the government or?
When we lived in Berbera, we met a guy there who was at that time I think he was the mayor of Berbera. He became probably, I suppose, if I interpret it in English, he probably became the father of independence, a guy named Muhammad Ibrahim Gal.
Oh, okay, yeah.
He was very westernised, I suppose, because I think he went to university in the UK. Yeah. His father, I think, was possibly a trader in Berbera, because I think when he sadly passed away, he was buried in Berbera.
Oh, okay.
But no, we had some great discussions with him about the future. I brought it home to England with me, and I can't remember where it is. I have his political card from the SNL, which is signed on the back, which I put a piece on the internet. I also had a brass heart badge with SNL stamped on it. They were all made by the local blacksmiths and people, I think. I don't know what happened to that. I lost that. But no, I think him and my father used to sit down in the clubhouse in Berbera and talk about the future and what was going to happen and how things were going to go. I think he had some great ideas, but I think they weren't all interpreted the way. I don't think independence really came the way he wanted it to come. I think it was all planned that it was going to come in 1960. And there were the talks about how British Somaliland was going to join Italian Somaliland to become a greater Somaliland. And he felt that a lot of the tribes people, I suppose they were the warlords or the tribes people or the elders, all wanted it to happen in a hurry. But Muhammad Ibrahim Gal himself said he thought that possibly the new independent Somaliland should probably stay independent for a few years before anything was finally decided about the join. But he couldn't seem to get his wishes. He couldn't sort of portray why he wanted to. He didn't explain to me or my father why he wanted that to happen. But it was just, I think, quite sad really that things happened like they did. I mean, we left in 1960 and There was no internet. There were no British newspapers or British news that spoke about any of the African countries that became independent. There was nothing at all. All we really got was the bad news. We got the news about the devastation of old Somaliland. There was a program on the television a number of years after that happened. It was a documentary put together by David Bowie's wife.
Oh, okay, the model Iman.
Yeah, the model Iman, how she went back after the war to try and find whether her relatives were still in Somaliland, whether they'd survived. And there was cameras showing her travelling through Hargeisa. And although I'd been away for a long time, I couldn't see it was devastating. I couldn't find a landmark that I recognised. Everything had just been flattened. So we got the bad news about that, but not about how the place became what it is today. The next thing was the Great Famine.
Right.
I think one of the big refugee camps, I think, was near Wajala.
Yeah, in Ethiopia.
In Ethiopia,
it's
on the
where
border.
Somalis live.
Yeah.
It's called Obara.
Yeah. There was the BBC TV pictures on there about how terrible things were,
Right.
and which was basically the seeds of Band-Aid.
Right.
No, so all we really got was bad news, and it wasn't until I retired and got my iPad and got onto the internet, it was just amazing. You know, to see Hargeisa, to see Borama, to see Berbera, and all the places that we lived, to see the way the agriculture had expanded in Gabili, for instance.
Yeah.
And some of the great ideas that had, like young married couples planting trees, which I think really should be, I think it should be the law in Somaliland. I think it should be the law. But you know, just to see the movies, although I can't speak Somali, because you have to remember that it's now 60 years ago since I left, and I hardly remember any Somali words. But I can't read what's written, because when I was there, Somali wasn't a written language.
Yeah.
So to try and read it when you can't remember the language is hopeless. But there, I mean, I don't know. I mean, there's loads and loads of people who seem to follow me on
Twitter.
on Twitter and on Facebook and on various places. I wrote, I think it was just as you and I became internet friends, or even before that, one or two people kept asking me different questions. So I did a script which I sent to Adwal
The press.
the press.
Yeah.
As I headed it, My Memories of Somaliland 1957 to 1960. And I did a brief piece on there, and I think I looked at it the earlier part of this year, 2008. I think 8,000 people had a read of it. Who they are, I don't know, but I just thought, well, at least somebody is getting something out of it. It wasn't put on there for nothing, you know.
Yeah.
But
It's a great bit of history.
But as far as the language is concerned, it's very difficult to remember anything.
Are there any certain words that
I can remember, let me have a think. Nabadgilio? Yeah. Mahachekta. Yeah, Mahaidonisei. Kolaba Sade Afashan. They come to mind. But putting any sentences together, everybody used to run around looking at the sky, so it must have been rain. Was it called Rop?
Rob, yeah.
Yeah, and Bio was water. It's difficult. I'm not going to embarrass you or myself. I can't even remember any of the bad words. they're the first ones you learn when you go to a new country. Yeah. I think I was quite surprised that some things were called the same. Like, was it the sharks in the sea and the lions were all called lachem?
Lahem.
Lachem?
Yeah, I think that means meat.
That means meat, does it?
Yeah.
Oh, I can't remember what.
I know what you mean though. There's no specific words for like certain species.
Species, no.
They just have like one.
Yeah. The animals. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I suppose it's probably a Latin name. The little tiny antelopes were called dick, but they were called sicaro.
Yeah.
There was other species were called either geranok or owl.
Yeah.
I used to know the name of some of the birds, but I can't remember. It's a lot. You're digging 60 years back into my brain now. I can't remember it. There's certain things that I just can't remember.
Yeah.
But no, it was a great time. It's a great experience. You know.
I guess the final question is, you know, would you like to go? I'm sure you'd love to go back. What do you think of, you know, you've seen the pictures online?
I've seen the pictures online.
What do you think of?
I suppose it would be a bit of a clash, really, because I mean my memories of Borama are probably, I'd have to probably hunt the town out for 2 or 3 days to find out the places where, because it has grown so big.
Yeah.
It's nice to see it's grown so big. Yeah, it's great to think that, you know, the country it's just politically criminal that the country hasn't been recognised. It's frightening to think that what the country could have been with some help from the international banks and places like this, if the country was recognised. It's frightening to think what it could be, to see what's happened with the country, with just the Somali people who are spread throughout the world, that have done for the country, the way it's grown. And you've been so, I think you've been so self-sufficient, and you've done so well, what with having elections, peace, you know, I think, you know, okay, I'm biased. I still look upon Somaliland as my second home, because it's the place I loved as much as I love my own country. You know, it's a standout country in Africa. I mean, just moving away from Somaliland, I sometimes look at Ghana. I only spent 12 weeks in Ghana. I spent 6 weeks in 1962 and 6 weeks in 1963. Again, up near the Sub-Sahara and in Accra, the capital. And I look at that country now, and frankly, I think it's gone backwards since 1962. You know, it was the first country to become independent. Everybody helped Ghana. There was goodwill and assistance from Russia, from America, from Great Britain. And I don't think it's as good now as it was in '62. You look at Somaliland after the horrendous war, and you look what they've done and what they've got now. I mean, Somaliland must be the standout country. Must be the standout country. What with their politics, their police force, their military, the way the country is governed and looked after. There'll always be fights between, a bit of infighting here, there and everywhere, but no. I think they should be put on a pedestal, not stamped upon by the politics of the rest of Africa saying they can't become an independent country. I'll wave the Somali flag until they put me in the ground. It's been very nice talking to you.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.